Let us now start with how hand labor and steam power. It's basically a comparison between hand labor and steam power, how people reacted to it. Now, you know that during the Victorian age, there was enclosing of the land which was done, in which the lands were taken away from the peasants and now it was converted in huge large chunk. So many peasants who were working in the fields of rich farmers, now they were suddenly without work. They migrated to the cities as a laborers and they started looking for job in the factories or in small domestic units where they were welcomed. So hand labor was cheap, not very expensive, and of course it was not it did not require too much of care also. Machine, it needed whole lot of care, it needed whole lot of looking after, whereas there was abundance of labor and the labor were ready to work at less wage. Now you will find that many industries, they had work during seasonal period, and during the seasonal period they wanted to hire more and more workers. So many people migrated, especially during the winters, they migrated to the city area. Throughout the summers and the phases of summers and spring, they worked in the countryside, and the end of summer or the beginning of autumn they used to migrate in a movable big carts to the cities where they were ready to do work, and of course after working for few months they used to migrate. They were still connected with the countries, but many laborers were not connected to the countryside. They have left. They did not have land, they did not have money, so they have left everything from the countryside and they have migrated to the city area, and they were willing to work in the city areas. Whereas you will also find that handmade products were welcomed by the aristocracy of Britain, because they wanted exclusive things, and handmade work was far more superior than the machine made work, because machine made work was not producing things as it is producing today. You have to understand, it was a beginning phase, so there were plenty of errors, there were plenty of trials that was going on. So let us now focus on the life of the workers. How do you think the life of the workers were? Because there were abundance of labor, so everyone was ready to work at cheap wages. So the life of the workers was miserable. They in fact were ready to work at very low wages. They of course if they had any family members or any friend in any factories, so they could get an easy job, but it was difficult for many to get job. When there was no job, they used to live in night refuge or sometimes even on street, and of course they lived a very miserable life. Their houses were overcrowded with people. There was no sanitation, there was no hygiene. Most of the laborers suffered from several fatal diseases. There were no fixed working hours. They have to work for 14, 15, even sometimes 16 to 17 hours. They used to sleep in the factory. Again, they used to work. They were considered like hands. They were not treated as humans, but they were treated as hands. And you will find those the workers who were working in the seasonal factories, their condition was very poor, because after a period of time they did not have any work to do and life became very miserable for them. So these workers lived a very hard life in the city areas. Many of them life was so miserable that they planned to shift back to their countryside. But for those workers who did not have anything in the countryside left, so for them it was a compulsion to live in these cities and adjust to the city life. So these workers were not treated as humans and their life was very miserable, and they have to live a very hard life. There was plenty of competition, there was plenty of disease, there was lack of sanitation, there was lack of hygiene, and there was lack of work. So everyone has to work very hard, and of course it was a severe competition that they has to face. So definitely these workers lived a very, very miserable life, and of course they could not even complain, because if they were ready to leave, there were many more hands waiting to get new work. Let us now start